Many believe that if Hitler had not been there, World War II would not have taken place. On which side India would have sided in this Cold War? How different the modern world would have been if Hitler and Axis forces had won the Second World War. Hey guys, this is Prashant from Tech Pluto, and today we have a very special story about none other than Hitler. What if Hitler had triumphed in the World War II? Well, the World War II is often described as the deadliest war in the mankind's history. And the war resulted in the death of millions of citizens and soldiers and displacing and injuring large section of humanity. But who was really responsible for this deadly war which led to such unimaginable human suffering? Most historians agree that multiple factors had caused this catastrophic war, but many historians and masses generally blame one person for forcing World War II on the world. That man was the famous German dictator Adolf Hitler. Many believe that if Hitler had not been there, World War II would not have taken place. It was Hitler's controversial decision to attack Poland in 1939 that is widely considered to be the starting point of the Second World War. This attack was part of Hitler's grand ambition to make Germany not only a dominant force in Europe but also across the entire world. But as it turned out, destiny was not with Hitler. Germany and its allies, Italy and Japan, lost the World War II. Unable to swallow this humiliation, Hitler and his newlywed wife committed suicide on 30th of April 1945. After Hitler's death, the World War II was all about over. And so did end Hitler's dictatorial ambition to make Germany a de facto global power and make fascist Nazi ideology the most powerful political ideology in the world. Well, today many consider Hitler to be the ultimate symbol of evil. Many also describe Hitler as the worst dictator that mankind has and will ever see. What if Adolf Hitler would have eventually become the most powerful dictator in the world? Even to imagine such a scenario is the scary thing. In this special episode, we will try to deconstruct this hypothetical yet scary scenario. But before we address this mythical question, we would like to give a brief introduction about this enigma called Adolf Hitler. Well, who was this man? How he became so popular among Germans, and what was his Nazi ideology all about? Adolf Hitler was one of the decorated German soldiers during the World War I. Germany's humiliating defeat during the World War I left a deep impact on his mind. The shameful defeat forced the young man to introspect on what really led to the defeat of his country. He expressed his explicit views on World War I and his future vision for Germany in his autobiography as well. In fact, this book provides a deep insight into the mind and mental makeup of Hitler. In this book, Hitler particularly blamed Germany's Jewish community for the country's defeat in the World War I. He claimed that the Jewish people, especially those Jewish who migrated from Eastern Europe, are traitors and mortal enemies of Germany. Hitler also laid out the theory of Aryan supremacy in his autobiographical book. He described Aryans as the most superior race while non-Aryans as an inferior race. For Hitler, native Germans were originally the Aryans. He even considered the native citizens of Norway, Denmark and Sweden as Aryans. On the other hand, Jews, blacks and all the immigrant communities living in Germany were non-Aryans as far as Hitler was concerned. Hitler was equally adamant about restoring the national pride of Germany following the country's crushing defeat in the World War I. He said that the only way Germans could avenge the World War I defeat was to annex and seize more and more land across Europe. In the process, Germany should also defeat its mortal enemies UK and France and make these two countries its permanent territories. Well, Adolf Hitler eventually became the dictator of Germany in 1932. He became the dictator partially by luck and partially because of his own political convictions. Once he became the dictator, he left no stone unturned in transforming the fascist Nazi ideology into a reality. He used his fiery oratory skills to instill pan-German nationalism among German citizens. Ordinary citizens could not help but get swayed away by Hitler's passionate call for nationalism. His oratory skills also made him immensely famous among the German masses. Hitler's speech and rallies were attended by millions of Germans. This man became so famous that millions of Germans saw him as a savior that would help Germany become Europe's superpower and in the process help the country in extracting the revenge of World War I. Now, driven by this nationalistic fervor, the German army attacked several European countries. Starting from Sweden in 1939, it then attacked Norway, Denmark, Belgium, Netherlands, Luxembourg, and even France. Now, panicked by Hitler's military aggression, UK and France decided to enter the warfare while Japan and Italy became allies of Germany to form what is commonly referred as axis of power. Now, this brings me to the main theme of our story. How different the modern world would have been if Hitler and Axis forces had won the Second World War. Now, let us try and examine some practical possibilities if at all this had happened. Although many people claim that Hitler wanted to conquer the entire Europe, practically even the German dictator probably knew that this was not going to be possible. Now, Germany neither had the military nor the financial resources to conquer and run a huge continent like Europe. However, Hitler would have never ceded any ground from the smaller European countries that Germany conquered during the war. Now, these countries include Poland, Belgium, Austria, Czechoslovakia, Denmark, Luxembourg, and Netherlands. Now, Hitler always believed that these smaller European countries had a huge German-speaking population and also had deep historical connection with Germany. And therefore, Germany had the moral right to annex and control these countries. Now, this means that today, territorially, Germany would have been a much bigger country. Hitler would have even converted Germany and its allied territories into a Nazi bloc, similar to the lines of Soviet Union. Berlin would have obviously served the capital of this Nazi bloc, and Adolf Hitler would have obviously served the emperor of this bloc. But what about France and UK? Would they too have become part of the Nazi bloc? Well, many political analysts argue that despite emerging victorious in the war, Hitler may not have colonized these two countries. Instead, he would have chosen to impose humiliating restrictions on both these countries, very similar to the humiliating restrictions that Germany was subjected to after losing the World War I. Well, Hitler would have forced UK and France to sign treaties where both countries would have been forced to greatly curtail their military capabilities and ambitions. As a result, today, UK and France would not even have their naval bases. UK and France would have been equally barred from having nuclear weapons. Now, until now, I was only talking about Hitler's expansion plans. But what about other important allies in the Axis power, namely Italy and Japan? Like Germany, both these countries had also strong imperialist ambitions. If the Axis power had emerged victorious, Italy would have surely increased its territorial control in the African continent. The easiest way to achieve this was to take control of all of the French colonies in Africa. Now, since France would have ended on the losing side of the World War II, it would have left with no choice but to give complete control of all its African colonies to the victorious Italy. France controlled as many as 6 to 7 African colonies, while Italy had similar number of colonies in Africa since the 1890s. With French colonies now under its control, Italy would have become the dominant power in the entire African continent. Now, let us talk about Japan. Spurred by its imperialist ambitions during the Second World War, Japan had attacked scores of Asian countries like China, Hong Kong, Malaysia, Singapore, Burma, and Indonesia. It was clear that Japan wanted to become the most powerful country in Asia. However, as we all know, Japan had to withdraw its forces from all these countries following the defeat of Axis forces. But if Hitler and Axis power had won the war, then there was no question of Japan surrendering these countries. In fact, the victory in the Second World War would have further motivated Japan to keep expanding its territory across Asia. Who knows, Japan would have even attacked India for that matter. Japan's spectacular rise would have also meant that China would have been kept under control. Japanese would have continued to subjugate China and ensure that it remains a marginal power. As a result, China would not have become the powerhouse that it has become today. Today, we keep having endless debate about China being the next superpower. But probably today, having such debates would have been meaningless had Axis power emerged victorious in the World War II. And how can we forget about Hiroshima and Nagasaki? America's decision to drop nuclear bombs in these two Japanese cities in August 1945 is probably one of the darkest moments in the human history. The nuclear bombings led to the death of millions of Japanese citizens in a matter of few hours. America took this extreme step in response to Japan's surprise military attack against America's naval base in Pearl Harbor in 1941, killing almost 2,000 American soldiers and citizens. However, it must be noted that Hiroshima and Nagasaki bombings happened almost 4 years gap of the Pearl Harbor attack. By this time, Hitler had already committed suicide and Axis power had all but lost the World War II. This means that America mustered the courage of detonating the nuclear bomb only after it was sure that it would not face any military aggression either by Japan or Axis forces. But if Hitler and the Axis forces had been in position to win the Second World War, we can be pretty sure that Hiroshima and Nagasaki would have never even taken place. And now, since we are talking about the nuclear bombs, we must remember that Hitler too had strong ambitions for possessing nuclear bombs. It is now pretty much confirmed that despite several attempts, Germany failed to develop a nuclear weapon. It is said that Hitler had deployed an army of German scientists for developing nuclear weapon, but this mission did not achieve much success. But had Hitler won the war, he would have not only continued with the mission but also made sure that he succeeded in it. Hitler would have become equally paranoid after realizing that US has become the first country in the world to possess nuclear weapons, and this would have only motivated the German dictator to succeed in his mission by hook or by crook. Now just imagine a fascist and crazy dictator like Hitler being in the possession of nuclear bombs. He would have unleashed a bigger nuclear holocaust than Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Hitler would not only have used nuclear weapons against his war enemies like UK and France, but against any country that stood against his Nazi fascist ideology. Now, Hitler would also have ensured that the Allied forces did not possess or have any access to nuclear weapons in the future. As I had said earlier in this video, he would have compelled the Allied countries to sign treaties, forcing them to not only disarm nuclear weapons but ban them from participating in nuclear programs of any type. However, Hitler would not have been so naive to depend only on diplomatic treaties. He would have used the United Nations to his strategic advantage for imposing nuclear and military restrictions on the Allied forces. As we all know, the United Nations was established immediately after the end of World War II to ensure peace and harmony in the world. Well, UN was nothing but a modified version of the League of Nations, which was incorporated soon after the end of World War I. Now today, UN's 5 permanent members who also enjoy the veto power are those countries that emerged victorious in the World War II. This obviously includes the United States of America, Great Britain, France, Russia and China. The losing parties like Germany, Japan and Italy have been relegated to non-permanent members. Today, these countries have very less, say marginal influence in the world's biggest political organization. But if Hitler had won the Second World War, then scenario would have been exactly opposite. Today, Germany and its Axis power allies would have been the permanent members, while Allied forces would have been non-permanent members. Hitler then would have exploited the Axis power's cloud in the UN to impose all kinds of sanctions against the Allied forces. Now, with UN firmly on his side, he would have made dead sure that no other country apart from Germany and its Axis forces possessed the nuclear weapons. And yes, Hitler would also have exploited the UN to his advantage to create all kinds of hurdles in the formation of Israeli state. Now, Israel was formed in 1949 as a special homeland for the Jewish population. But since Hitler had a pathological hatred against the Jews, he would have gone to any extent to ensure that Israel is never formed. And in case if Israel were to be formed despite stiff opposition by Hitler, who knows, he would have gone ahead and used nuclear weapons to finish off the Jewish state. In a nutshell, if Hitler had emerged victorious in the World War II, then formation of Israel would have been very doubtful. Now, Russia or Soviet Union was supposed to be part of Axis power. In fact, when Germany attacked and conquered Poland, Hitler chose to share some territories of Poland with Russia as part of the agreement that both countries had signed. But in 1941, Hitler launched a surprise military attack against Russia, and Russia was then obviously left with no choice but to exit the Axis power. Now today, many political analysts claim that Hitler's decision to launch a military attack against Russia was a big political blunder, a blunder that actually costed him the World War II. But for the sake of our own convenience, let us assume that Hitler never committed this blunder. Germany and Russia would have worked like a perfect team and ensured that Allied forces are defeated. This scenario would have opened up endless possibilities once the World War II was over. In fact, this scenario would have turned the history as we know it completely upside down. For instance, the decade-long Cold War fought between the US and Soviet Union would have never taken place. Germany would have replaced the US and the Cold War would have primarily fought between the Nazi Germany and Russia Soviet Union that stood for Karl Marx communism. With the defeat of Allied forces, America's participation in the Cold War would have been out of the question. The defeat in the World War II would have left America completely demoralized. Besides, Hitler would have misused UN to pass all kinds of sanctions against the US to ensure that the country is militarily and economically crippled and weakened. As Nazi Germany and Communist Russia battled it out to become the next superpower, both countries would have fought ferociously to gain new territories across and beyond Europe. The Axis power allies, that is Japan and Italy, would have been forced to take sides. On the other hand, UK and France, the two principal forces in the Allied forces, would have made sure that they don't become the collateral damage in this Cold War. The entire world would have been divided into two blocks, the Nazi bloc and the Communist bloc. And this would have spelled bad news for the world peace and harmony. Both Nazi and Communist ideology have least tolerance for free speech and democratic values. This means that in the post-World War II world, dictatorship tendencies would have spread like wildfire, literally leaving no scope for human liberty, free press, and even democracy. The world would have equally witnessed unprecedented rise in human rights violations. As Hitler's Nazi bloc would have kept expanding its territories aggressively, it would have made life for Jews across the world into a living hell. The infamous concentration camps that were started by Hitler to subjugate Jews would have sprung up across the world. In a world dominated by Hitler, the concentration camp would no longer have remained a phenomenon restricted only to Germany. Instead, it would have become a global phenomenon. The German dictator's Aryan supremacist ideology would have equally wreaked havoc across the world, relegating non-Aryan people into inferior race and thereby making their lives miserable. Now, a very interesting question is that on which side India would have sided in this Cold War? Would India have stayed neutral or taken firm side either with the Nazi bloc or Soviet bloc? Well, this is actually an open-ended question and there is no straightforward answer to this question. But even the bigger and most important open-ended question is this: what would have happened to Germany and Nazi ideology once Hitler died? Would Germany have become dramatically weak after Hitler's death, giving much needed chance to the United States to assert its dominance over the world? We can keep on making endless speculations and predictions over what would have actually happened if Hitler had won the World War II. But one thing is pretty sure, that Nazi ideology would have been defeated in the longer run. Soviet Union's dictatorial communist ideology lost out to America's free market capitalism that thrived on the human liberty and freedom. Hate never wins, it eventually loses. And therefore, even if Hitler had won the World War II, his hateful Nazi ideology would have been defeated in the longer run. Well, this was the story about Hitler. If you like this story, make sure to hit the like button on this video and subscribe to our channel. And yes, share in the comments which more topics you want us to cover. This is Prashant signing off. See you in the next one.